Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are exploring something absolutely fascinating, the very foundation of the Buddhist spirit. We're going to take some incredibly profound, ancient wisdom and break it down into a highly practical, genuinely useful framework for your everyday life.
So, let's dive right into our primary source material. We're looking at a text called The Challenge of Enlightenment, and specifically, we're focusing on a really monumental lecture given on November 23, 1992, titled What is the Buddhist Spirit? And you know what's so cool about this text? It takes teachings that are literally over 2.5 millennia old, and instead of framing them as these mystical, hard-to-grasp theories, it presents them as a practical, step-by-step diagnostic tool for the human condition.
Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. The first sermon, 2. The middle way, 3. Diagnosing human suffering, 4. The cure for suffering, 5. The Eightfold Path, and lastly, number 6. Limitless perfection.
Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, the first sermon, Shakyamuni Buddha at Sarnath.
To really understand this, we need to travel back over 2,500 years to a place called Sarnath in India. This is where Shakyamuni Buddha, who had just attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, delivered his very first teachings to 5 former companions. This exact moment, it's known as the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Now, in ancient art, people were actually too reverent to draw the Buddha's physical form, so they would just draw a large wooden wheel beneath a tree. And that's absolutely crucial, because it shows that the Buddha's true essence isn't just a physical person. It's the teaching itself. It's like a massive wheel starting to turn, setting these fundamental truths into motion and rolling them out into the world.
Moving right along to Section 2, the middle way, the perfect balance.
Okay, so to understand what the middle way actually is, we first have to look at what it's not. On one side, you have extreme asceticism. This is actually the path the Buddha himself tried and eventually abandoned. We're talking starving yourself to the bone, severely punishing the physical body in the hopes of finding spiritual purity. The text is super clear on this. Ruining your body, definitely not the answer. But then, on the entirely opposite end of the spectrum, we have extreme hedonism, pure pleasure-seeking, just completely losing yourself in worldly desires. The Buddha realized that neither of these extremes leads to true spiritual development. Our source text offers this beautiful, perfectly simple metaphor to explain the solution. Think of a stringed instrument like a kato or a lute. If you pull that string way too tight, which is like extreme asceticism, it's going to snap. But if you leave it completely loose, like extreme hedonism, it won't make a single sound. The middle way isn't about having zero tension in your life, it's about finding that exact, perfect, moderate tension so your soul can play a beautiful melody.
Which brings us to Section 3, Diagnosing Human Suffering, the Four Noble Truths.
The text frames these 4 noble truths incredibly clearly. Honestly, it's like a timeless medical protocol. Step 1 is recognizing the symptoms. Suffering exists. Step 2 is the diagnosis. There is a root cause for the suffering. Step 3 is the prognosis. It can actually be cured or extinguished. And Step 4 is the prescription, the practical path to treat it. Now, when the text says life is suffering, you might instantly think of grand, tragic events, but the source material uses highly relatable modern examples. It points out that suffering can be as simple and as frustrating as catching a really bad cold. Why did you catch a cold? Well, maybe you walked out into the freezing snow without wearing a coat, just totally ignoring the reality of the weather. Suffering is basically the friction that happens when our personal illusions clash with reality. So pause for a second. Think about your own life. What are the persistent frustrations or colds that you keep catching?
All right, Section 4, the cure for suffering.
The absolute crucial point in finding any cure is correctly identifying the root cause, right? Well, the text explicitly identifies the pathogens causing our illness. Human suffering is based on spiritual ignorance, and this usually shows up as greed, fiercely wanting things we probably shouldn't have, and anger, lashing out the second things don't go our way. We suffer because we are living under the massive delusion that we can just force the world to bend to our own selfish desires. Simply recognizing that fact, that's half the cure right there.
Now for Section 5, the Eightfold Path, the treatment regimen.
Just knowing the disease isn't enough. We actually have to take the medicine. And that brings us to the actual treatment regimen prescribed by the Buddha. The Eightfold Path is basically a deeply practical checklist for daily living. It starts with right view, seeing the world not just with your physical eyes, but with a spiritual perspective. Then comes right thought, actively clearing your mind of that greed and anger we talked about. Right speech reminds us of the massive damage our words can do. Right effort is all about planting good seeds every single day. Then we apply right mindfulness to keep our intentions clear and right concentration to deeply center our minds. Add in right action and right livelihood, and together these 8 principles form the concrete, step-by-step method to enter and sustain the middle way.
And finally, Section 6, Limitless Perfection. So why do we go through this rigorous process of diagnosing our pain and applying these 8 treatments? Because the Eightfold Path is not a one-time magical spell. It's a continuous, daily method of self-regulation. The text emphasizes that enlightenment isn't some finish line where you just pack up and stop growing. By continuously walking the middle way and practicing these 8 principles, you are stepping onto a path of limitless perfection. You are constantly tuning that kodo string, day after day, ensuring your life continues to play a beautiful, harmonious melody. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really think about. Which string in your own life is currently pulled entirely too tight, causing you unnecessary suffering and stress? Or, conversely, where are you leaving things way too loose, failing to make a sound? How can you start applying the practical steps of the Eightfold Path today to find your own middle way? Thank you so much for joining me on this structured journey through the Buddhist spirit. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.
Welcome to today's explainer. We're digging into an absolutely fascinating source text right now. It's based on a Dharma talk from way back in November 1993 called Escaping from Ignorance. And what makes this so incredibly compelling is how it gets right to the root of human suffering. Even better, it gives us a real, structured, actionable prescription to fix it. So, if you're into understanding the deep psychology of why we struggle and how to actually overcome it, you are in the exact right place. Let's get into it.
So have you ever felt like you're just stumbling around in the dark in your own life? You know that feeling. You aren't sure where you're going, you keep bumping into things, and every step just fills you with this subtle, lingering anxiety. Well, the source text uses this exact, powerful metaphor of navigating life without a flashlight to describe our baseline state of human suffering.
And that brings us to our first major concept from the text, mumo, which translates to ignorance. But here is the crucial distinction. This kind of ignorance has absolutely nothing to do with your IQ or where you went to school. The literal translation of the characters means an absence of light. It's a lack of inner wisdom. It's that state of walking blindly in the dark, which practically guarantees we're going to stumble, get hurt, and suffer. Looking at this chapter heading directly from the original text, it translates roughly to the cause of life's suffering. The author is making a really bold claim here. This specific ignorance, this lack of inner light, is actually the root cause of almost all the suffering we experience. Grasping this is the very first critical step in diagnosing our own minds. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit the root of suffering, the 3 core poisons, the traps of pride and doubt, a case study on the classic novel Kokoro, and finish up with the path out of the dark.
Section 1. The root of suffering, walking blindly in the dark.
Section 2. The 3 core poisons, greed, anger, and delusion. Okay, the text doesn't just leave ignorance as some vague, abstract idea. It actually breaks it down into actionable symptoms. According to this framework, ignorance breeds specific toxic mindsets known as the 3 poisons. Think of these as literal toxins that cloud your judgment. We've got greed, which is our endless craving, anger, our frustration and rejection when things don't go our way, and delusion, which is basically our foolishness, our inability to just see reality as it actually is. Whenever you're hurting, I guarantee one of these 3 is hard at work in your mind. To really hammer this home, the text uses this visceral, completely unforgettable analogy. Greed is like a stray dog rummaging through a trash can. It's shamelessly hungry, completely oblivious to how it looks to anyone else. It's a brutal image, right? But it perfectly captures how greed just hijacks our dignity. It makes us blindly chase desires without even realizing how desperate or shallow we might look to the outside world.
Section 3. The traps of pride and doubt, afflictions of the capable.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The text identifies 2 advanced poisons specifically tailored for highly capable, excellent people: pride and doubt. Pride is that inflated ego, the voice saying, "I am great, I know best." It's a trap for smart people because, let's face it, they often are right, which totally blinds them to their own flaws. And doubt? We're not talking about healthy curiosity here. This is a dark, cynical distrust of others, an endless, paralyzing questioning that just destroys your peace of mind.
The text makes such a brilliant observation about this. Modern society loves doubt.
right? We're taught to be scientific, to question absolutely everything. The source impartially notes that while that's super useful for science or journalism, applying endless personal doubt to your relationships cuts you off from human connection. It's like missing out on this massive, sweet harvest of autumn grapes just because you're too cynical to believe the fruit is actually real.
Section 4. Case Study. Soseki Natsume's Kokoro. The 5 Poisons in Action.
Theory is great, but let's look at a practical application. The source uses characters from Soseki Natsume's classic Japanese novel Kokoro to show how these 5 poisons ruin lives. Take the character K. He falls to greed by wanting to marry without a dime to his name, and pride by stubbornly refusing any help. Then there's Sensei. He is completely eaten alive by doubt. After a terrible betrayal over his inheritance, Sensei loses all trust in humanity, which spirals into self-distrust and tragically his eventual suicide.
The author points out something fascinating here. Kei wanting to marry the boarding house's daughter while basically living off Sensei's charity, that is a textbook example of blinding greed. It's the stray dog mentality, totally hidden behind the facade of an educated scholar. It just goes to show how even the smartest people can be completely oblivious to their own toxic mindsets.
Section 5. The Path Out of the Dark, How to Escape Ignorance.
So, having expertly diagnosed these poisons, how do we actually cure ourselves? The text drops this incredible mindset shift. Life is a workbook of problems. I will solve this workbook. I mean, wow, I absolutely love this. It completely reframes our struggles. Suffering isn't just random, meaningless pain. It's a personalized workbook. You're a student of life, and these hardships, they're simply math problems you're being challenged to solve.
So, how do we solve the workbook? The source lays out a logical 3-step progression. Step 1, recognize the suffering. You have to actually acknowledge the pain. Step 2, find the root cause. This means identifying exactly which poison is at play. Is it your pride? Is it greed? Step 3, make the firm resolution to remove that specific poison, extinguish the suffering, and finally step out of the dark.
Ultimately, we have to become like objective doctors diagnosing our own minds. Think about it. A doctor doesn't just guess, they investigate. Is it the heart, the stomach? We have to do exactly the same thing. We need to locate exactly which poison, greed, anger, delusion, pride, or doubt, is causing our symptoms. Because you can't write a real prescription for happiness until you've accurately diagnosed the root cause.
Which leaves us with a really vital question to ponder today. What poisons are hiding in your own workbook of life? I highly encourage you to look in the mirror after this and apply this framework to your own struggles. Are you clinging into a doubt that's keeping you isolated? Is some hidden pride making you stumble in the dark? Diagnose your mind, solve your workbook, and turn on the light. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most famous, and let's be honest, probably the most misunderstood ancient claims ever made, the Buddhist assertion that life is suffering. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds incredibly bleak, right? But stick with me, because we're going to decode its true, highly proactive meaning using some phenomenal source material. And you might actually be surprised to find out that it's not a depressing statement at all. In fact, understanding this is basically the secret to living a truly meaningful life.
Our guide for today's journey is a really specific, deeply analytical Japanese text. It's called The Challenge of Enlightenment, Volume 1 by Ryuho Okawa. Specifically, we'll be pulling insights directly from a profound Dharma talk given on February 7, 1992. This talk systematically breaks down human suffering, the original teachings of the Buddha, and then compares those ancient concepts to modern spiritual interpretations. So, we're going straight to the source.
So, let's just get right into it. When you hear the phrase, life is suffering, does it sound to you like just the ultimate pessimistic worldview? Honestly, it's so easy to assume it means there's just absolutely no joy to be found anywhere. But as we're going to see, the text argues that this is actually a highly practical starting point. It's a diagnosis, it's not a doom scroll. Okay, here's the quick roadmap we'll be following today. First, the shocking diagnosis. Second, symptom breakdown. Third, finding the root cause. Fourth, the treatment plan. And fifth, a modern second opinion. We are basically going to treat this whole concept like a step-by-step medical diagnosis of the human soul.
Starting with Part 1, the shocking diagnosis, understanding suffering. Let's see how this ancient philosophy actually diagnoses the human condition.
The source text makes it crystal clear that the Buddha's declaration wasn't meant to rob us of hope. It's actually a reality check.
When it says life is suffering, it's pointing out a hard truth. Human existence lacks true, lasting spiritual fulfillment if we're only focusing on worldly, physical desires. It's designed to literally snap us out of our illusions so we can face reality objectively. Think of it as the ultimate wake-up call to start looking for deeper meaning.
Moving on to part 2, symptom breakdown, the 4 and 8 afflictions. Now, what's really fascinating here is how incredibly precisely the text categorizes the pain we all feel. It's clinical.
So the text outlines what are known as the 4 sufferings. These are the absolute certainties. No amount of wealth, power, or status is going to prevent these. We have aging, sickness, and death, which, are pretty self-explanatory physical declines. But look at that first one, birth. The text paints such a vivid picture here. It describes birth not just as this joyous occasion, but as a spiritual struggle. It's the transition from total freedom in the spiritual realm to being confined in the darkness of a womb, entirely dependent and stripped of your ability to express yourself emotionally. Wow, that is a profoundly different way to look at our entry into the world.
But wait, there's more. To those physical truths, the text adds 4 psychological afflictions, creating the 8 afflictions. And this perfectly captures the daily emotional struggles of just being human. You've got the pain of separation from loved ones. You've got the stress of encountering people you dislike. We've all had to deal with a difficult boss or coworker, right? Then there's the endless frustration of unfulfilled desires. And that last one, the 5 aggregates, refers to those burning physical passions and the sheer inability to control our bodily urges, even when our higher minds want to be more spiritual. I think we can all relate to at least a few of these today.
Part 3. Finding the root cause. So, if we all share these exact same symptoms across humanity, we need to locate the source of the infection.
The text uses a super relatable analogy here to explain this next step, known as the origin, or the truth of the cause of suffering. Think of suffering as the symptom, like catching a cold. The origin is that diagnostic aha moment where you recognize that your own actions caused the illness, like remembering the exact moment you decided to walk outside in the freezing snow without a coat. It's all about taking radical responsibility for our own minds and realizing, hey, my own attachments are creating my distress.
Which brings us to part 4, the treatment plan, cessation and path. Because this ancient philosophy isn't just pointing out the bad, it is heavily focused on the cure.
The text frames the famous 4 Noble Truths as a step-by-step methodology. It is literally a medical model for the soul. First, you acknowledge the illness. That's suffering. Second, you identify the origin. Third is cessation, which is the incredibly optimistic confirmation that yes, the suffering can absolutely be eliminated. And finally, the path. This is your prescription. The text identifies this ultimate treatment plan as the 8-fold path, a set of right views, right thoughts, and right actions designed specifically to cure the soul's ailments.
Finally, part 5, a modern second opinion, happy science. How exactly does this ancient framework translate into the modern day? The 1992 Dharma talk details a really interesting philosophical shift. Traditional teachings often emphasize escaping worldly suffering, starting with a strict negation of worldly attachments to move from spiritual weakness to strength. But in contrast, the text explains that the modern spiritual movement of happy science builds its framework on a foundation of affirmative, active expansion right out of the gate. They use what's called the 4 principles of happiness: love, wisdom, self-reflection, and progress.
So this modern approach takes those traditional concepts and reinterprets them for today. For example, traditional ideas like compassion and almsgiving are evolved into highly active principles. It focuses heavily on giving love and utilizing enlightenment with one massive constructive goal: building a utopia, a new peaceful civilization. It's a huge shift from simply curing the illness of the individual to actively building robust health and sharing it with the entire world.
But here's the beautiful thing. Whether you look at the ancient path of negation or the modern path of affirmation, the core objective is exactly the same. The text reveals that the Buddha's true intention behind highlighting all this suffering was never ever to make us despair. It was to execute a complete mental pivot. By confronting us with the harsh reality of our physical limitations, it forces our minds to reverse direction, away from fleeting physical pleasures and directly toward a profound, lasting spiritual awakening.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought directly inspired by our journey through this amazing source material. You now know the symptoms, you know the medical model of the soul. So when you encounter your next inevitable affliction, because you will, whether it's a difficult coworker, a physical ailment, or just a disappointed expectation, how are you going to approach it? Are you just going to suffer through it, or will you use that symptom to trace the origin, change your path, and find the cure? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep learning and keep questioning.
Okay, let's dive right into a really fascinating paradox today. We're looking at how a genuinely brilliant mind can somehow completely miss the mark on a profound spiritual truth. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a concept that has confused scholars literally for centuries. We're talking about the core Buddhist concept of non-self, and we're going to map out exactly where the academics went so terribly wrong.
So we start with this gripping story from the text about a highly respected professor at Chi University. We'll just call him Dr. Yu. Now, this guy literally dedicated his entire earthly life to mastering Buddhist texts. He was famous, he published complete works, and he was absolutely convinced he knew every single thing there was to know about the Buddhist teachings. But here's the catch. The source describes a spiritual encounter where this very scholar, after he passes away, appears from a dark, lost realm in the afterlife. He's completely bewildered. He's crying out, "I researched so much, I studied so much, why don't I understand?" It's a striking paradox, right? How does a lifetime of academic mastery actually lead to spiritual darkness?
Well, to answer that, we're turning to our source material for today. Specifically, we're looking at Chapter 4 of a really profound Dharma talk given on March 4, 1992, titled What is Non-Self? This text directly exposes the massive historical error in how non-self has been taught, and it traces that error all the way back through the history of Buddhism. It's basically a sharp, direct critique of over-intellectualizing things to the point where you lose sight of actual spiritual salvation.
Moving into Section 1, The Scholar's Fatal Misunderstanding and the Trap of Materialism.
You see, the exact academic trap that Dr. Ume, and honestly countless others, fell into was built on taking ancient wisdom just way too literally. Historically, scholars looked at the word non-self, which literally translates to having no self, and took it at absolute face value. Their logic went kind of like this. Okay, if the Buddha taught no self, then fundamentally there is no enduring individual ego. And if there's no ego, there can't be an eternal soul, so therefore, when you die, your soul must just extinguish. It decomposes into absolute nothingness. They basically concluded that the ultimate goal of enlightenment was self-annihilation.
But the text brilliantly points out the massive logical flaw in this academic theory. It asks a really simple question. If there is no soul, how on earth does reincarnation work? Think about it. If the self is completely extinguished at death, what exactly is the subject that's undergoing the cycle of rebirth? The source notes that even the Buddha's original disciples were terribly confused by this. They were wondering, wait, if we are non-self, do we just disappear when we die? It creates this huge contradiction in a belief system that is fundamentally built on the idea of a soul undergoing continuous training across multiple lifetimes.
So the absolutely crucial point here is contrasting these two views. The academic view, when you take it to its logical extreme, actually turns into a hidden form of materialism. It's essentially saying, hey, this physical life is all there is. And the source points out that this has even led Western scholars to define Buddhism as a sort of materialistic atheism. But contrast that with the spiritual truth presented in the text. Humans are eternal, reincarnating souls undergoing training. This physical world is just a temporary school. Our scholar, Dr. Yu, was totally lost because his empty materialistic theories completely blinded him to the reality of his own soul's existence.
All right, on to Section 2, the true meaning of non-self.
So, if non-self doesn't mean your soul just vanishes into thin air, what on earth does it actually mean? Well, this definition is really the key to our whole explainer today. Non-self doesn't mean you, as a spiritual entity, cease to exist. Rather, it means stripping away the demanding, selfish ego. The source states that your original existence is a being of light, created by the fundamental divine source of the universe. Non-self is actually the active practice of remembering that original pure state. You do this by letting go of worldly attachments and shaking off the illusion that anything in this temporary physical world truly belongs to you.
The mechanics of that attachment all start with a single, tiny concept, the word I. The source explains that I immediately generates the toxic idea of my things. You know, my possessions, my status, my brilliant ideas, and that breeds deep, deep attachments. The text emphasizes that to actually achieve non-self, we have to actively take a sword to this concept of my and mine, because if we don't sever these earthly ties, they literally become the chains that bind us to suffering, and exactly like our lost scholar, they keep us wandering around in the dark after we pass away.
Which brings us to Section 3, Uniting with the Divine. Now, understanding the theory is one thing, right? But how do we actually practically empty ourselves of these attachments? Thankfully, the text outlines a really clear three-step internal process. Step 1 is reflection. That means honestly looking at our own thoughts and actions to spot where the ego is at work. Step 2 is meditation, quieting the mind so we can detach from our physical senses. And step 3 is prayer. The text notes that the ultimate goal here is earnestly reaching out to realign and become one with the Buddha or that divine source. It's all about shifting your focus away from the tiny, demanding I and toward the vast, eternal divine.
This passage reminds us of what you might call a beautiful kind of spiritual physics. You simply cannot be filled with light if you are already full of yourself. The text explicitly states that if the thought of myself is too strong, the divine light just cannot shine through. But when we successfully quiet those demanding egos through reflection and prayer, we create a vacuum. We essentially make room for the light of the divine to actually enter us and shine through us into the world. Now for Section 4, Altruism as True Salvation.
You see, internal reflection is really only half the battle. To truly embody non-self, there absolutely has to be outward action. The text asserts that true non-self isn't just sitting all alone in quiet meditation, it is the active, lived practice of profound altruism. It literally means living for the sake of others. It means expanding your heart so much that you genuinely feel the pain of others as your own pain, and you share in their joy as your own joy. Because by dedicating your life to loving and serving others, you naturally stop obsessing over your own ego. By focusing outward, that selfish I just dissolves. And this brings us right back to our law scholar from the beginning of the explainer. This perfectly captures the absolute tragedy of his situation. He had all the text memorized, sure, but he completely missed the heart of the message. The source emphasizes the profound sadness of a human being who only studies religion intellectually. Gathering immense knowledge is entirely useless and actually spiritually dangerous if it just remains an abstract theory trapped inside your own head.
There's a quote here that brilliantly illustrates the core thesis of this entire 1992 text. It says, "Even if you build up empty theories and abstract arguments, they are nothing if they do not increase the happiness of people." I mean, that hits the nail on the head. Philosophy, religion, spiritual study, it has to actively save and uplift people in the real world. If it doesn't translate into love, into altruism, and into actual human happiness, the text argues that it is entirely meaningless.
So I want to leave you with a final thought and a bit of a challenge today, directly inspired by our source material. We've seen how a truly brilliant scholar got completely lost in the maze of his own intellect just by forgetting to actually live the teachings. So the question for you is, how can you take this ancient wisdom out of the realm of abstract theory today? What is one specific way you can apply love and altruism right now to break free from your own ego and actually increase the happiness of someone around you? Think about that for a bit. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.
Welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right into it today. Our goal here is to unpack some of the most profound, ancient concepts in human history. Specifically, we're looking at the Buddhist ideas of emptiness and dependent origination. Now, these can be pretty heavy topics, but we're going to break down the source text's modern framework so you can easily grasp exactly what's being proposed. To do that, we're going straight to our source material, a fascinating text called The Challenge of Enlightenment. Specifically, we'll be focusing on Chapter 5, which is actually based on a Dharma talk given back on April 2nd, 1992. The whole point of this text is to clarify these teachings that, honestly, even Buddhist experts often find confusing. It offers Happy Science's original interpretation to kind of pull back the curtain on the practical mechanics underneath these central concepts. So here is our roadmap for the breakdown. First, we'll look at emptiness versus nothingness. Second, impermanence versus non-self. Third, we'll explore perspective 1, the spiritual cycle. Fourth, perspective 2, materializing light. And finally, perspective 3, dependent origination. All right, starting with section 1, emptiness versus nothingness. Let's get our definition straight. Now, this is the classic and, let's be honest, slightly terrifying question people often have about Eastern philosophy, right? If the ultimate goal of enlightenment is to realize emptiness, does that mean you just vanish? Do you just pop out of existence into some dark, empty void? It's a super common misconception, and it makes enlightenment sound way more like an existential nightmare than an actual spiritual awakening. But the source text makes a really sharp distinction here. To clear that up,
It defines nothingness as a completely hypothetical state. Think of it like someone hitting a cosmic pause button, a complete cessation of existence where time stops entirely. But the text argues that is simply not reality. Emptiness, on the other hand, absolutely does not mean blank. It means that things do exist, but they are dynamically changing over time. They don't have a permanently fixed physical substance. So emptiness is all about constant, flowing transformation, not some static, empty void.
Moving on to Section 2, Impermanence versus Non-Self. This is all about looking at two very different scales of change.
The text argues that the crucial difference between these two concepts is just scale. Impermanence is what we can observe right here on Earth. It's the physical life and death cycle, birth, growth, and decay. Like a seed growing into a beautiful flower that eventually withers away. But to understand non-self, the text asks us to zoom way, way out to a cosmic scale. It's looking at the grand, continuous cycle of a soul moving back and forth across different dimensions. To really map out this idea of emptiness, the text uses a brilliant rule of three framework. It breaks it down into the spiritual cycle, the materialization of light, and dependent origination.
Let's dive into that first perspective in Section 3, the spiritual cycle.
The text uses this really relatable movie theater analogy. Imagine you're sitting in a cinema. The explosions, the romance, the action on the screen, it all feels intensely real in the moment, right? But the screen itself is literally just a flat 2D surface. The actual source of the movie is the film rolling in the projector behind you. According to this interpretation, our earthly lives are just like that projection. They are temporary, physical manifestations of our deeper, eternal soul. So physical existence is empty because it's merely a temporary projection, not the actual, eternal source.
Next up, Section 4, Perspective 2, Materializing Light. This one sounds almost like modern physics.
Seriously, think about this for a second. If our true nature is just spiritual, invisible energy, how on earth do we end up with physical bodies, or solid chairs, or heavy rocks? How does spiritual energy actually take physical form?
The text answers this with what it calls the materialization phenomenon. It claims that absolutely everything is fundamentally composed of Buddha's light, or divine light. When this light exists at a super high wavelength, it stays invisible. But when that light slows down, it becomes denser and heavier until it physically materializes into matter. So the text argues that our solid physical world is actually just a temporary, slowed down state of energy. That is essentially emptiness in action.
And that brings us to Section 5, the third and final perspective, dependent origination.
Now, here's the logical paradox the text attempts to address. We've just established that everything is constantly changing, it's just a projection, and it's basically just slowed down light without a fixed physical core. Okay, so why isn't everything just falling apart? How does any coherent object or person manage to exist at all?
The text breaks this down using the concept of causes and conditions. Think about chemistry. Look at hydrogen and oxygen. They are the cause. But you can't just put them in a room and expect a puddle. You need an environmental condition, like heat or a spark. Only when the cause meets the right condition do you get the result, water. The exact same thing goes for nature. A seed requires the conditions of soil, moisture, and sunlight to actually become a flower. According to the text, nothing exists independently. The entire universe relies on this incredibly intricate, continuous interplay.
To really drive this home, the text uses a bullet train analogy. If you snap a photo of a roaring bullet train as it zips past, in that photo, it looks perfectly solid and totally frozen in place. But we know that static image is an illusion, right? It's actually in constant, massive forward motion. The text suggests that our physical reality is exactly like that photograph. What feels like solid, permanent reality to us is really just a momentary snapshot of an ever-changing web of causes and conditions. To tie this whole metaphysical framework together, the source synthesizes these ideas perfectly. It shows us that emptiness is not some dark, scary void. Instead, it proposes that the universe lacks rigid physical boundaries precisely because it is a dynamic, living thing, constantly sustained and transformed by descending spiritual light. So, what is the big takeaway here? Consider this framework for a moment. If you started viewing your physical reality not as a permanent, rigid trap, but as a temporary condition born from a massive, interconnected spiritual web, how would that shift your perspective? If your daily stresses and roadblocks are just fleeting snapshots of a much larger cosmic journey, the world might just look a little bit different, wouldn't it?
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this helped unpack these incredible concepts for you.
Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're going to tackle one of the most profound, abstract, and just completely fascinating topics in human existence. Today we're diving straight into Chapter 6 of the teachings, specifically focusing on a Dharma talk from April 1992 about karma and reincarnation. We're going to demystify the mechanics of our destiny across our past, present, and future lives. Seriously, have you ever wondered why you are the way you are? Why certain frustrating patterns just keep repeating in your life? Well, today we're decoding what is essentially a manual for the soul. We'll be breaking down the ancient, cosmic laws of cause and effect using an incredibly analytical and structured approach. We are literally going to make the invisible spiritual world visible for you. So here is our roadmap for this diagnostic journey. First, we'll look at the cycle of suffering. Second, the mechanics of reincarnation. Third, the three realms. Fourth, the soul brotherhood theory. And finally, shaping your future life. Before we get into the heavy spiritual mechanics, I really want you to ask yourself a super direct question. Think about it. When things go wrong, do you feel like you're just a victim of a bad hand? Or is it possible that you actually dealt the cards yourself in a past life? Look, it's totally human nature to blame our environment, our parents, or just the universe for our daily grievances. But the material we're exploring today completely challenges that mindset. It suggests that your current environment, your deepest struggles, and your greatest joys are actually the direct result of your own past actions. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the cycle of suffering. Okay, so we really need to diagnose the root cause here. Why do humans reincarnate over and over again, only to return to a state of profound dissatisfaction? Well, sitting under the Bodhi tree, Shakyamuni Buddha realized a profound law of cause and effect. It's perfectly encapsulated in what's known as the three paths. It starts with delusion, specifically the three poisons of greed, anger, and foolishness. When our minds are clouded by these delusions, it directly drives our daily karma, which just means our actions and our ingrained habits. And what is the inevitable result of these negative karmic actions? Suffering. It's a precise logical sequence. Delusion causes karma, and karma results in suffering. This is the original, fundamental problem that causes humanity to get stuck in this endless repetitive loop. And this is exactly why we keep getting pulled back to Earth. The source material explains this with such fascinating clarity. Just imagine crossing over to the spirit world. You no longer have a physical body, right? But your earthly attachments, they actually remain. You might vividly crave the taste of your absolute favorite meal, but without a physical stomach, you can never actually feel full or satisfied. Or you might be consumed by romantic or sexual desires. This intense nostalgia for the physical world, these raw cravings, they act like a giant magnet. Because the spirit world simply cannot satisfy these physical urges, the soul is literally compelled to return to the earthly realm. It creates this repetitive, almost animalistic cycle of rebirth, driven purely by appetite and attachment. That leads us to Section 2. Mechanics of reincarnation. So how exactly does this all play out? How do our simple, everyday behaviors forge our eternal karma? The crucial point is this: karma itself is technically neutral. You can absolutely build good karma through kindness and discipline, but human nature is, well, it's tricky. The teachings point out that if we're left entirely to our own natural inclinations, without any kind of spiritual guidance, we generally tend to drift toward the negative. You know, we get a little lazy, we get selfish, we get angry, and when these bad habits accumulate unchecked over an entire lifetime, those repeated actions solidify into our karma. It basically becomes the heavy luggage we drag around with us, forming a chain of karmic debt that completely dictates our future. The Buddhists have a name for this mechanism. They call it the 12 links of dependent origination. And what's wild is that it's not just mystical poetry. It's a highly analytical, almost medical approach to tracking the soul's development. It maps out cause and effect across 3 distinct existences. It shows how causes from your past life created the exact conditions of your present life, and how the actions you are taking right now, today, are currently planting the seeds for your future life. It's a stunningly logical framework that connects your soul's journey across the vast expanse of time. Moving right along to Section 3, the 3 realms. With that micro-level understanding of our daily actions, let's zoom out. Let's look at the macro-level destinations that this accumulated karma actually directs us toward after we die. Our afterlife destinations are categorized entirely by our spiritual maturity into 3 distinct realms. First up, we have the desire realm. If your life was totally dominated by earthly cravings, you cycle through here. This includes the 6 paths, which encompasses human rebirth, but also lower dimensions like hell or the realm of hungry ghosts. Now, if you've evolved past heavy human desires and you value spiritual truth, your karma elevates you to the form realm, situated in the 6th to 7th dimensions. And finally, for those who transcend human attributes entirely, we're talking true angels and tathagatas who exist as pure light, they reside in the formless realm, the 8th dimension and above. So, quite literally, your daily actions right now are determining your spiritual zip code in this multidimensional universe. Which brings us to Section 4, the Soul Brotherhood Theory. Okay, prepare yourself for a massive plot twist regarding the traditional view of reincarnation. The traditional view usually paints it as this super lonely journey, right? Just a single, isolated soul grinding through lifetime after lifetime all by itself. But the source material reveals the soul brotherhood theory. You are not alone. You are actually part of a cosmic support system. According to this framework, a human soul is generally a group of 6, 1 main body and 5 branches. Instead of one single soul doing all the heavy lifting, these 6 take turns reincarnating. You are currently sharing the vast journey of spiritual growth with a highly invested team. To really grasp how deeply connected this group is, there's a fascinating medical metaphor from the text. It describes the group as being like internal organs, the heart, liver, and kidneys, working together subconsciously. Think about it. You don't consciously tell your lungs to breathe or your kidneys to filter, but they work together constantly to keep your whole body alive. The soul brotherhood operates the exact same way. If the branch soul currently on Earth makes terrible choices and falls into hell, the overall spiritual energy of the entire group plummets. This prompts the other 5 members back in the spirit world to desperately work harder, sending guidance and striving to heal their fallen brother to elevate the collective soul. No pressure, right? But seriously, your spiritual success or failure impacts your entire cosmic family. And finally, Section 5, Shaping Your Future Life. So what on earth do we actually do with all this profound cosmic knowledge? Let's bring these high-level concepts back down to reality for some practical, everyday application. The teachings challenge us to honestly evaluate our present state. I want you to grade your current life satisfaction on a 100-point scale. Are you in a 90, a 50, a 30? If your score is low, it's very likely due to karmic baggage from a past life. But here is the critical warning. Sitting around and complaining about a low score or blaming your circumstances does absolutely nothing to fix it. In fact, complaining only solidifies that negative mindset, ensuring that you are going to carry that exact same karmic debt right into your next existence. You're literally just kicking the can down the road of eternity. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. If you score low today, what maximum effort are you going to make tomorrow to ensure true happiness in your next life? The teachings from this Dharma talk make it crystal clear. True happiness, a happiness that transcends the 3 existences of past, present, and future, doesn't just happen by accident. It requires seeking enlightenment, letting go of those toxic earthly attachments we talked about, and putting in maximum effort right now, in the present moment. Your future is absolutely not some predetermined punishment. It's a blank canvas, and your daily actions are the brushstrokes. So what kind of future are you going to paint starting today? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I hope this framework has helped you see your own life in an entirely new, deeply empowering light. Welcome back to The Explainer. Let's dive right in. Because today, we're looking at a truly fascinating lecture from November of 1993, titled The Challenge of Enlightenment. And what makes this so incredibly compelling is how it takes ancient, foundational Buddhist thought and turns it into a highly practical scaffold for modern life. We're not just talking about abstract philosophy here. It's literally a direct, step-by-step guide to decoding the human condition. So, think about this for a second. Why do we always feel unfulfilled no matter what we actually achieve? You know the feeling, right? You finally land that big promotion, you buy the dream car, you meet the perfect person, but eventually, inevitably, that nagging feeling of wanting more just creeps right back in. Well, the 1993 lecture we're analyzing today diagnoses this exact feeling. It presents a 2,500-year-old framework to explain exactly why our minds do this, and more importantly, how we can break the cycle. Here's how we're going to break it all down today. We'll start with the universal problem of suffering, discover the middle way, unpack the 4 noble truths, break down the 8 inevitable sufferings, and finally, learn how to actually overcome the mental poisons. All right, jumping right into Section 1, the problem of suffering as a universal condition. What's really fascinating here is how the source material completely redefines a word we use all the time. In this framework, the concept of suffering, or ku, is not just about having a toothache, breaking a bone, or enduring physical pain. It defines suffering specifically as the universal state of experiencing unfulfilled desires. It's that constant low-level friction you feel when the reality of your life doesn't perfectly align with exactly what you want. And honestly, this condition is completely universal because we all hold on to these ideals. I mean, if we're smart, we wish we were a little smarter. If we have money, we kind of wish we had more. Even if someone appears to have this completely perfect, totally enviable life from the outside, internally, they still harbor unfulfilled desires. It is just a fundamental part of being human. Okay, moving on to section 2, the middle way and discovering balance. To really understand the solution here, we have to look back at Siddhartha Gautama's historical search for enlightenment. At age 29, he actually renounces his incredibly comfortable life as a prince, and for 6 intense years, he engages in extreme ascetic practices. We're talking severe fasting, enduring intense physical pain, basically pushing himself to the brink of death. But ultimately, he abandons those extremes and discovers what is now called the middle way. This perfectly illustrates the contrast he found, because neither extreme actually works. Extreme asceticism, like literally starving yourself, just harms the body. In fact, the lecture points out that a physically exhausted, clouded mind actually blocks high-level spiritual communication. On the flip side of that, living a completely lazy, indulgent lifestyle just sitting on the couch yields absolutely zero spiritual growth. So neither starvation nor total laziness is going to lead to true understanding. Which brings us to the actual solution, the middle way. Essentially, this means maintaining peace of mind and spiritual concentration within a moderate, disciplined life. You need just enough discipline to keep yourself grounded, but also enough physical well-being to allow for deep, sustained spiritual focus. It was really only by adopting this balanced, moderate life that true enlightenment became possible for him. Now for section 3, the Four Noble Truths, also known as the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma. I absolutely love this next part because it uses such a highly relatable analogy. The Four Noble Truths aren't just some abstract, mystical poetry. They actually act as a clinical, step-by-step diagnostic tool. According to the text, treating life suffering is exactly like diagnosing and treating a common cold. Let's see how this builds into a practical process for modern life. Just like treating a cold, there are 4 simple steps. First, acknowledge the symptom. You have a cold, or in life, you are experiencing suffering. Second, find the root cause. Did you walk outside in the freezing rain without a coat? Or what specific unfulfilled desire is causing your emotional pain? Third, visualize the cure. Imagine being totally healthy and the peace that brings. And fourth, apply the treatment. For a cold, you take medicine. For life suffering, you practice the Eightfold Path. It is a wonderfully logical, step-by-step method for personal problem solving. Which brings us to section 4, the 8 sufferings. Time to agitate the problem a little bit. So to use that diagnostic tool we just talked about, we first have to look at the 4 fundamental sufferings: birth, aging, disease, and death. And what's super fascinating here is the text's interpretation of birth. It's not just viewed as this joyful arrival, it's actually framed as an intense fear. It's a constrained, somewhat scary transition from a free spirit world into a heavy physical body. Then we have aging, where the gradual loss of physical control causes deep frustration. Disease, which is just the inevitable disharmony of the body. And death, our ultimate instinctual fear of the unknown. But, of course, it doesn't stop at just the physical inevitabilities. We also have 4 social and internal sufferings. There's parting, which is the pain of separation from the people we love. Meeting, which is that very distinct misery of being forced to interact with people we absolutely can't stand. We've all been there, right? Then there's unfulfilled desires, constantly craving things we just cannot have, and burning passions, being tormented by uncontrollable worldly urges. These 4 really show how our daily social interactions constantly generate friction in our lives. And you can take these ancient concepts and fit them right into the modern living room. For the pain of parting, the lecture actually points to the 90s cultural phenomenon of the Norita divorce, which is when couples would literally separate the exact moment they return to the airport from their honeymoon. For meeting, it's clashing with a difficult mother-in-law or having to deal with an angry boss every single day. For unfulfilled desires, it's missing out on that big promotion. These aren't abstract ideas. They are deeply relatable, everyday agitations. Let's look at how to fix it in Section 5, Mental Poisons and Overcoming Root Causes. So what is the ultimate root cause of the disease? It's a state called ignorance, or mumyo. But to be clear, this doesn't mean a lack of book smarts or education. It's a state where the mind is heavily clouded by worldly desires and mental poisons. Basically, our perspective gets completely warped, blinding us to the truth and causing us to suffer over things we really shouldn't be stressing about. The text outlines 5 specific mental poisons that cloud our minds like this. First up is greed, that endless, insatiable craving for more status or money. Second is anger, which typically flares up when reality doesn't meet our expectations. Third is foolishness, spending all your energy complaining about your circumstances instead of actually learning from them. Fourth is arrogance, which is intriguingly described here as a flipped inferiority complex. And fifth is doubt, cynically rejecting the truth or just constantly assuming the worst in others. Let's zoom in on just one of these poisons for a second: anger. An angry person often turns their own household into a daily battleground, making everyone around them totally miserable. But the crucial point here is the root cause. Chronic anger rarely comes from a place of pure strength. Instead, it almost always stems from unmet expectations, a lack of self-control, or deeply hidden inferiority complexes that just flare up defensively. So what is the structural cure to all of this? Well, to manage these mental poisons, we have to learn to view ourselves objectively, almost like a third party observing our own lives. We have to practice strict self-reflection to match our expectations to reality, making sure we aren't demanding the impossible from the world. And finally, we absolutely must build mental resilience through continuous learning, actively diluting these mental poisons with actual wisdom. The true beauty of this framework is how it takes these grand, massive philosophical concepts and turns them into a highly practical, everyday toolkit. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. Which unfulfilled desire is causing your suffering today? And how will you use this specific diagnostic framework to finally let it go? Remember, identifying the poison is always the first step to finding the cure. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time. Welcome to the explainer. So let me ask you something right out of the gate. What if this physical world we're living in right now is actually just a temporary dream, and the afterlife is when you actually wake up? It's a pretty massive paradigm shift, right? Well, today we are taking a structured journey deep into esoteric Buddhist philosophy to unpack a fascinating lecture that challenges literally everything we think we know about reality, the self, and what actually happens to our souls. We're going to be breaking down a seriously powerful 1993 lecture titled The Challenge of Enlightenment, specifically looking at Lecture 2 from Volume 1. What's so great about this source is that it demystifies these incredibly complex, ancient Buddhist themes by looking at them from a strictly spiritual perspective. In doing so, it actually corrects some major historical misunderstandings pushed by later materialistic scholars. Honestly, it's an incredible shift in how you view the world. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for the soul's journey today. We'll start off by rethinking the non-self, then we'll explore emptiness and the real world, move into the law of dependent origination, tackle karma and the 12 links, and finally, we'll finish up with the reality of reincarnation. All right, jumping right into Section 1, rethinking the non-self, the false ego versus the soul. We're pivoting away from the big cosmic rules for a second to focus straight down on our own perception of the individual self. So, the source starts off by discussing this foundational concept of muga, or non-self. Now, historically, a lot of later scholars interpreted this in a really materialistic way, basically claiming it meant your actual soul just doesn't exist. But the lecture strictly points out that this is a huge historical error. Muga absolutely does not mean you have no soul. Instead, it's about denying the false ego and all those stubborn attachments we have to our physical bodies. It's essentially about stripping away those physical illusions so you can wake up your true spiritual self. It's actually super fascinating to contrast these two viewpoints. The materialistic view erroneously denies the soul's existence entirely, but the true spiritual view, it simply denies the false physical ego. So it's not saying you don't exist, it's saying the part of you that you think is you is really just a temporary physical facade. So what exactly makes up this false ego we're supposed to be ditching? Well, it's our worldly attachments. It's our total obsession with physical appearance, our status, our bank accounts, and even just basic bodily senses like hunger. The lecture uses a really relatable example here. You know when your stomach is completely empty and hunger just dictates every single thought you have? Or when we define our entire worth by our job title, we totally forget that none of this stuff comes with us when we pass on. It's a real wake-up call to evaluate what we truly identify with. And that leads us perfectly into our next core concept in Section 2, emptiness and the real world. Because once we actually manage to discard that false ego, how are we supposed to view the physical world around us? This brings us to the concept of ku, which translates to emptiness. Now, hold on. Emptiness doesn't mean some depressing, dark, meaningless void. Not at all. It's actually the profound truth that all matter lacks a permanently fixed substance. It basically means that our physical reality is entirely transient. It's literally just a temporary dwelling for the soul. The lecture uses a fantastic analogy to explain this. It compares the physical world to a temporary dreamlike stage play. Being born on Earth is actually compared to falling asleep and dreaming. The spiritual world, on the other hand, is the permanent reality. It's our true home backstage, so to speak. So passing away isn't the end of the line. It's really just waking up from the dream and returning to reality. Moving right along to Section 3, dependent origination, the rules of reality. If this physical world really is just a temporary dream, what are the actual cosmic rules running the show? Here, the source introduces NG, or dependent origination. This law dictates that absolutely all phenomena and matter arise strictly from interconnected causes and conditions. It essentially proves that nothing in the physical world is permanent or self-sustaining. Everything you see around you only exists because a very specific set of circumstances temporarily allowed it to. And this brilliantly illustrates that exact complex law using a really practical, everyday analogy: water. Step 1 is the cause, right? Hydrogen and oxygen. But they don't just magically become water on their own. They need step 2, the condition, which is heat. Only then do we get step 3, the result, water. The lecture explains that since physical things are just these temporary combinations of causes and conditions, holding on to deep, painful worldly attachments is, in the end, completely illogical. Which brings us right into Section 4, karma and the 12 links, the soul's journey. Now we're shifting our focus from the nature of the physical world itself to how your soul actually travels through it over time. The lecture unpacks a concept known as 3-period causality. Think of it like a cosmic domino effect. In the past, a soul harbors spiritual ignorance. This directly manifests as present wrong actions, which is what we call karma. And then that karma inevitably creates future worldly suffering. So, the absolute crucial takeaway here is that our current worldly struggles very often stem from past spiritual misunderstandings, and if we don't resolve them right now, they're just going to spill straight into our future. This whole causality is mapped out in something called the 12-linked chain of dependent origination. I know, it sounds super intimidating, but the lecture succinctly breaks down its core pathway into a really clear logical progression. It all starts with ignorance, which leads to action, forming a trapped consciousness. That breeds attachment to the physical world, ultimately forcing a rebirth to just repeat the cycle all over again. Basically, the soul gets trapped in a loop of suffering unless it consciously replaces that ignorance with spiritual awareness. Finally, let's explore Section 5, the reality of reincarnation. Let's look at this final stage of the soul's journey and figure out how to navigate it consciously. The source shares an incredibly striking metaphor for souls that get stuck in that chain we were just talking about. Washing machine reincarnation. Wild visual, right? This describes a cycle of rapid, unconscious rebirths totally driven by a lack of spiritual self-reflection. Instead of spending time in the spiritual realm learning, growing, and preparing, a soul trapped in worldly attachments just gets spun right back into a physical body, over and over again, completely unaware of what's happening. Furthermore, the source clarifies that we do not reincarnate alone. This is due to the soul group connection. The lecture uses the brilliant analogy of a single human body. You have the head, the torso, and the limbs. They're all distinct parts, right? But if the right hand strikes something, the whole body feels the impact. This means your individual karma, your actions, and your spiritual growth directly affect your entire interconnected spiritual family, or your soul group. You're in it together. So, to summarize our deep dive today, the ultimate takeaway is really clear. True spiritual elevation requires letting go of worldly attachments and bravely facing your karma through deep, honest self-reflection. Discarding the false ego isn't just a philosophical idea. It is presented as the primary path to break the chain of suffering and elevate not just yourself, but your entire connected soul group. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up. What parts of your false ego are you still holding on to today? Are you letting your worldly status, your wealth, or your physical anxieties define who you actually are? take some time to reflect on what truly matters when the stage play finally ends. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep elevating.